Welcome to another episode of Creo Parametric for SolidWorks users. And in this episode, we're going to talk about creating features in the part modeling environment. In order to help illustrate these concepts of how you do things in Creo Parametric, I'm going to create a bunch of features, 7 main features in SolidWorks first, in order to create geometry for this part, and then show you how I would do that in Creo Parametric. And since this episode is focusing on features, I'm starting out in a part model where I've already created a few different sketches for myself. First off, I'm going to take one of my sketches and then revolve it. In SolidWorks, you have a revolved boss base command. Be aware that there is a separate revolved cut command. If I go to the surfaces tab, there is another command for a revolved surface. But I'm going to create a revolved boss base. When I click on that, it opens up the property manager for the feature. I'm being prompted to select a plane that I want to sketch or select an existing sketch. So I will select one of my existing sketches in the model. Here you can see a preview of the geometry that will be created. It's going to revolve this 360 degrees about the first entity that I had selected. It is using that as the axis of revolution. There's some other different options if you wanted to find a different depth in the second direction. You can also create a thin-walled feature. And also there's an option here for selecting certain contours that you want to revolve. But I'm happy with this, so I will hit the check mark in order to build this first feature in the model. Now that I've got my revolve in here, I'm going to create an extrude. And so to create my extrude, here we have the extruded boss base command. And for the sketch that I want to use, I'm just going to select it out of the model tree, or excuse me, the feature design tree. I apologize for mangling the name. And so I can start dragging it up to see a preview of the depth that I want. And I know that the depth for this one is 270, so I will hit the button, and that is good. Let me pan it on the screen. And so I'm happy with this extrude to a blind depth. You'll notice in here there are other options for direction 2, thin feature, but let's hit the check mark in order to complete that. I need a few fillets on the part, so let's go to the fillet command. And I will select for the items to fillet. I will select this edge and then this edge over there. And I want it to be a value of 40. I'm just going to use the up arrows in order to crank that value. I'm good with this fillet. You'll notice that there are a bunch of other different options available in here. But for this, all I have to do is hit the check mark. And I need another fillet over on the other edges. Oh, let me get rid of that warning. And so let's go to the fillet command, and I will select this edge and then left click on the other edge as well. And this one is going to be slightly bigger. This one is going to be a value of 50. I'm happy with that. Let's hit the check mark. And so there I have my vertical fillets placed in the model. All right, the next thing is that with this sort of like, what I call the chimney in here, I want this to have draft, but I only want to have draft below a datum plane reference that I have in the model. Let me go to this plane and I'm going to make it visible. So this plane is where I want my draft to be split. And so first off, I need to create a curve that I'm going to use as my split line. So let's go to the curves command. And then, why are you still warning me about this? I said, no, don't show this again. All right, let me go to my curves command and then choose split line. And here it's using the option intersection. That's what I want. And so for the selections, here in the collector, I'm going to select the plane that I want to use for splitting this. And then I'm going to choose in the other collector for what I want for my references. And so let's select this surface. I'm just left clicking on these surfaces. You can see a preview of the intersection line that is being created. And let's see, rotate a little bit more. And by the way, yeah, if you see me messing up how I want to move this on the screen, that's because the way that you move stuff in Creo and SolidWorks are a little different, and so I end up mangling that every once in a while. Okay, so I'm happy with this split line. Let's hit the check mark. And now I can create my draft. Let's go to the draft command. And then for this one, here's the option for doing a parting line draft. For my direction of pull, I will use this plane, and I can flip the direction if I want to, because I want the draft on the bottom side of that chimney. And then for my parting line, I will start selecting these different edges. Oops, I got it in the wrong direction. Let me choose other face and then get this split. Oops, did I get the split line? Let me get the edge and then flip it. And there might be a faster way to select these and flip it. If there is, I just don't happen to know it, but maybe some expert here can weigh in on the comments in order to illuminate that knowledge to me. So let me select that one, other face, and then select this one. Let's go other face, and let's see this one, other face. And let's do this one and flip that one. Okay, so let's see. What will really help is if I can see a preview of this. I want this to be 6 degrees to the inside. So just crank that up. You can also change the value manually, but everything there looks good. Let's hit the check mark in order to complete that. I no longer need to see that plane. Which plane are you? Here, my draft split plane. So let me hide that one from view. And let's see, for the next feature that I am going to create, let's take my last sketch that I have in order to create an extrude. So I will select it, and then I can go to the extruded boss base command, and let's grab that. I need it to be much shorter. And for the depth, I can choose mid plane, so I can get half on one side and half on the other. And for this one, I want the total depth to be 25. Let me plug in a value and hit the enter key. That looks good for this extrude, and I will hit the check mark. And for this feature, I want it to be mirrored. Let me select the mirror command. And so for the mirror planar face, I think it's the plane called right. Let me turn on my plane display for a moment. Let's choose the right plane as the mirror plane. You can see where the feature is going to end up. I like that. Let's hit the check mark and then turn off my plane visibility. And the last feature that I'm going to put in here is a hole going down the middle of my revolve. And so for the revolve, why are you warning me about this? Let me go to the different hole commands. And so if you take a look here in the ribbon, we have the hole wizard, and people love the hole wizard. You go into the hole wizard, whatever. You go into the hole wizard, you have your different kinds of holes, and you have your drop down list for what standard that you want to use. And this is very nice, very good. It's a nice tool. But for the hole that I want to create, I just want to have a simple hole. So I'm going to cancel out of here. There is a simple hole command available from the sheet metal tab. You can also go to your insert command and then features, and here is simple hole. And the weird thing about this is that first you're basically going to just locate it in the model somewhere. You pick on a surface, and for the depth in this case, I'm going to choose through all. For the diameter of this hole, I want this to be a value of 62.5. Plug in the value. And so now I'll hit the check mark, but it's in the wrong location. So the standard workflow is that you actually go to the hole and then you expand it and then go to the sketch and then edit the definition of the sketch in order to locate it in the right place. And the sketch is in blue, indicating that it is not fully constrained. So to make it easy on myself, I'm going to go to the display delete relations dropdown, fully define the sketch, and then hit the check mark, just so that gives me some dimensions automatically. And I can just double click on these different values and change them to 0 to get it right in the middle of that face. It automatically dimensions to a couple of the datums that come automatically in the model. So let me hit the check mark. Let me hit the check to get out of the sketch. And so now I have the hole going through the model. So there are a bunch more features that I would create in here in order to finish it off. But again, I just wanted to create a bunch of features in this part, so then when I show this in Creo Parametric, you have some reference. Speaking of which, let's jump over to Creo to take a look at creating the same geometry. And I'm doing this in Creo Parametric 7.0 at the time of this filming. This version is 3 years old, but there are probably more people on this version or an earlier version than on the latest and greatest. So that's why I am using Creo 7. So anyhow, I've got the same part with the same different sketches in here. So I want to start off by creating the revolve of the first feature. I'm going to click on that feature in the model tree just because we have a mini toolbar that gives you quick access to these different commands. I'll click on the revolve. We get our preview. It's going 360 degrees. Now here is a big difference if you're coming over from SolidWorks. When we were in SolidWorks, we were getting the property manager on the left-hand side of the screen. In Creo Parametric, you get an interface that's called the dashboard. Why is it called the dashboard? Well, when Wildfire 1.0 first came out, over 20 years ago, it was down at the bottom of the computer screen, and so it was meant to be a dashboard, but they found that people were moving their neck too much, and so they put it up at the top of the screen, yet they still call it the dashboard. You can see that we have a bunch of different buttons that tell us what kind of geometry that we're creating. Here we can create this as a solid protrusion. It's adding material to the model. Here is the option if you want it to be a surface. So that's a big difference versus SolidWorks. In SolidWorks, you have separate commands for that. Similarly, here is a button for removing material, creating a cut, but this is grayed out because there's no existing material in the model, so you can't do a cut yet. Once you have geometry in the model, you could have this as a cut instead. And we've got other information like our axis of revolution that we can change. Here are our different angle options, and we're revolving to 360 degrees. I am going to hide my model tree for a moment and just show you that also you have these tabs that you can get to, and the tabs have other additional options available to you. In this case here, since we're doing a revolve, there's nothing really earth-shattering in the different tabs. But I do want to point out that in Creo Parametric, there's a lot of right mouse button functionality. And so this is the first place that you should go to for accessing different commands. As a matter of fact, you should focus your attention on the model in the graphics area and do as much as you can focusing on the model and only going to the dashboard when you need those edge case options. So for example, from here, we can toggle this from being a solid feature or a surface or a thin-walled feature. Here's where we can change our axis of revolution for using the internal center line. And there are some other different options in here. Also be aware that for your different drag handles or your different circles, if you right-click on them, you also get options pertinent to that. And similarly with a lot of these different dimensions, if you double-click on them, then you'll have another drop down with other additional commands that you can access from there. So there's a lot that you can do just right in the graphics area for working on your model. Also, another thing to point out, from the right hand side of the screen, there's a little tooltip. You can choose to read more if you need more information. And also sometimes you are in the middle of a command and you realize, oh wait, I need some additional datums in order to generate this feature. So you are able to jump into datum creation by using this drop down at the right hand side of the dashboard. And that will pause the dashboard and allow you to create whatever geometry that you need. So anyhow, that is the main interface for creating most of your features in part modeling. Let's hit the check mark in order to complete the revolve feature. I'm going to bring my model tree back so I can get to the next sketch for doing the extrude. And once again, if I select my sketch right out of the model tree, I will get the pop-up with my mini toolbar. Now I can say, hey, I want to create this as an extrude. Let me double click on the dimension in the graphics area in order to change the depth. I want this to be a value of 270. But what you'll notice is that this is automatically removing material. Since I had geometry in the model and I created this extrude, well, it took a guess that I want to remove material from the model. In this case, it guessed incorrectly, but no problem. I can use my right mouse button in order to get to my mini toolbar and turn off the option to remove geometry. That way it will add material to the model. And so once again, I want to point out that you have a lot of right mouse button functionality. So for example, in the side one direction, I am doing a blind depth, but you can change to these other different options for the depth. We also have the ability to define a depth in the second direction from the right mouse button functionality. So again, I just strongly recommend, especially as a new user to Creo Parametric coming from SolidWorks, that you take advantage of the right mouse button to see what kinds of commands that you can get to either from what they call the asynchronous menu or from the mini toolbar. But anyhow, I am happy with this, so I can hit the check mark. If you click on the middle mouse button, that is the same thing as the check mark. Okay, next up, I'm going to throw in some fillets, but in Creo Parametric, they call them rounds. So that's one thing that you will get used to. And another big difference between fillets in SolidWorks and rounds in Creo Parametric is that you can create multiple sets of references within the same feature. In SolidWorks, I created 2 different fillet features. I'm going to do all of it within this feature. And here's another thing that I find that SolidWorks users have trouble getting adjusted to. I will select one edge in the model here. Then if I want to select a second edge, I'm going to hold down the control key. If I hold down the control key, now both of these edges will belong to the same set. And when I grab this radius and change one of them, it's going to change the other one as well. Let me change this to a value of 40 because that's what I want for that one. Now, let's say I don't hold down the control key. I'm not holding down the control key. If I select, say, this edge over on the side, I'm actually creating a new set. So in Creo Parametric with features like your rounds and chamfers, you can have multiple sets within the same feature. Now, if I hold down the control key and then select this edge, that way that second edge belongs to the second set. And the second set can have a different radius value compared to the first set. So again, for SolidWorks users, 2 things I tend to find that they really don't like about Creo Parametric is that you're going to hold down the control key for selecting multiple references, and you have this concept of sets. A lot of times when I get a part model from someone who comes over from SolidWorks, I'll see that they'll have a round feature and they'll have like a dozen sets in here because they didn't know to hold down the control key, and then they'll complain, oh, why do I have to define a different dimension for each edge that I want to have in this round or in this fillet? So anyhow, those are a couple things to be aware of with rounds in Creo Parametric. All right, I will hit the check mark for that feature, and then I want to put in draft in this part. Let me turn on the display of my split plane that I'm going to use for my draft. Also, I need to turn on my general plane visibility. And to reduce my clutter, let me select a bunch of my default datums at the top of the tree and hide them. Okay, let's say I want to apply the same draft that I did in SolidWorks. Well, I don't need to create a parting line curve first. I can go right into the draft tool, which is located right here. When I click on draft, Well, the first thing that I need to do is I need to select the surfaces that the draft is going to be applied to. And for this one, I'm going to use an advanced selection technique. In advanced selection techniques, this is another thing that tends to throw off SolidWorks users. Now, let's say I wanted to pick all those 8 surfaces around the chimney. Well, rather than picking them one by one with the control key, if I select this top surface, then hold down the shift key and then pick an edge on that surface, it'll grab all the surfaces around that first surface. And so that's called loop surfaces. So that's a good selection technique that you want to be aware of in Creo. Okay, the next thing that I need to do is to define my draft hinge. So I'm going to hold down the right mouse button, and from here I can activate the collector for draft hinges rather than moving my mouse over to the tab or to the main part of the dashboard in order to get to it. So let's go to draft hinges, and I'll pick that plane that I selected. But now if I go to the split tab, from here I can choose that I want to split by the draft hinge. And for this one, I can choose to flip the direction for my side one direction, and I can just grab this and I can grab the angle and drag it to 6 degrees and then leave the top at 0 degrees. So that's all I need to do in order to configure the draft in this model. So I can hit the middle mouse button in order to complete that. And let's select the plane and then hide it so it is no longer cluttering up the computer screen. Okay, next one that I am going to do in this model. Here I've got this sketch. I will select it. And from the mini toolbar, I can choose to extrude it. So you can pick it either out of the model tree or off of the screen. And let's make this a lot shorter. And I can right click on that little drag handle and change it to symmetric and change this depth to 25. That's good. I'm happy with this extruded feature. So once again, I'll hit the middle mouse button. And with the feature still selected, if I click on the right mouse button, I'll get my asynchronous menu as well as the mini toolbar. And right from the mini toolbar, I can choose that I want to mirror this feature. Let me turn on, I would turn on my plane display, but I remember that I hid the datum plane called right. So I'm just going to select it out of the tree, and we can see a preview of the geometry that will be created. So I will hit the check mark, and that is complete. All right, for the last feature that I'm going to throw in here, I'm going to turn on my datum axis visibility. I'm going to create that hole. So I will go to the hole command, and we just have one hole command here. By default, it goes to the simple command. If you choose the standard button, well, that's where you get your different drop-down lists of different class types. I have a whole bunch of extra classes because I added them to my model. So for example, if you wanted a UNC class type of hole, you can choose that. Then you have your drop-down list. But for this one, I just want a simple hole. And for the placement, you've got a number of different placement schemes. So whereas SolidWorks is sketch-based for the location of your holes, in Creo Parametric, it's primarily geometry-based. And here I am in Creo 7. Be aware in Creo 7 and earlier, you could not create multiple holes within the same hole feature. Starting in Creo 8, you could actually use a sketch, and you can use the different endpoints and midpoints, different entities or aspects of sketched entities in order to define the location of your holes. But here in Creo 7 and earlier, well, you're basically just creating one hole per feature. And for locating this, I'm going to pick this axis going down the main part of the model. I will hold down the control key. There's the control key again in order to define the references. And I will right click over the depth drag handle and go to through all, and I can grab this handle and make it bigger, but I want the value to be 62.5, so I'll double click in order to change that value. And so that's how I can define my hole feature, my simple hole in Creo Parametric. So let me hit the middle mouse button in order to complete that. Let me turn off my axis display from the in graphics toolbar. And so there you can see how I created the same geometry in SolidWorks versus Creo Parametric. And so the things that I want to point out, again, you have a dashboard instead of a property manager. Also, you have combined commands. You have a single extrude command, for example, where you can add or remove material or create a non-solid feature or a solid feature. Last thing that I want to touch on, in Creo Parametric, I recommend that you create your sketch before you create the feature that uses it. You could create the sketch inside the feature, but it's just a lot more flexible if you create your sketches and have them as separate features. Let's take a look at our first revolve feature in the tree. If I expand the little box, there you can see the sketch that was used for the feature. And that's just like SolidWorks, but you'll notice that the sketch still appears up here in the tree. So in SolidWorks, when you use a sketch for one of your boss base or cut features, it sort of like gets absorbed into the feature that you are making. But in Creo Parametric, it remains in its location in the tree. Be aware that you can go to your tree filters, and in this case here on the first tab, you can choose whether sketches appear in the model tree, and you can also turn off the display of used sketches. So if I uncheck this and then hit the apply button, take a look at the tree. I'm going to hit the apply button. You'll see that some of the features went away. Let me go back here and then hit apply again. So that way we're seeing both our used sketches and regular sketches, but you can turn those off. I know that a lot of times people coming from SolidWorks don't like seeing all those other additional sketches in the model tree. So there you have it. I hope this helps anyone coming over from SolidWorks to get adjusted to Creo Parametric.